And I want to thank everyone here for their patience while a diverse group of people tried to recollect those days and try to tease out what lessons, if any, could have been learned from that experience. And now we'll have a bit of a conversation back and forth. Bear with us as a microphone. There are a few microphones, so I ask people to speak directly into them. I also have received a fistful of questions that had been handed to me. If there are others, if you might make your way to hand them to me, that would be helpful. I guess the first thing I'd like to ask, is there anyone here on the dais who would like to respond to one or another thing that any other person said for which you would like to either add a story or a comment?
One adjustment here, especially for Donovan. The National Guard actually behaved well for the most part. There were a few incidents, but it was the police and sheriff and highway patrol that were out of control. And that's part of why we were brought in, because they actually made the situation worse. Now, again, I don't have command information on that. I have gut information knowing why we were brought in, what we were brought in for, and so on. So I just want to make it real clear as I sit next to this guy. It wasn't me, dude.
You know, there's a small detail about Donovan's shooting. He was shot, I think, on Chilton, below Telegraph. And Lawrence Ritchie, who shot him, was the sheriff who had shot fatally James Rector. And he was about 2 months out from Vietnam. He'd been a machine gunner in a helicopter there. I mean, he was driven with post-traumatic stress disorder. And he locked and loaded for a second shot. And a bystander knelt down with Donovan as he was bleeding, got between him and Ritchie. Ritchie didn't shoot. And that bystander was Mario Savio. A little twist of history, twist of fate. And, I met a lot of people in this, and I'm really proud of the book. But the best part of this entire experience, including seeing this wonderful book, is having Donovan as a friend and brother.
You know, there's something I want to say about the value of the book, and particularly Nacio Brown's testimony in the book about the murder of James Rector, because Nacio was on the adjacent rooftop and watched and photographed what was going on. And you think about how history can be distorted. I don't know if other people saw it. Last weekend in the Pink Sheet in the Chronicle, there was a kind of review of a TV program. And the person who wrote it, I forgot his name, talked about how the sheriffs who shot James Rector were responding to a hailstorm of rocks and stones coming from the roof where James Rector was standing. Nacio's testimony completely refutes that, but it shows how important it is to stand for your understanding of history and not let others write it.
There were many brave photographers who put themselves in great danger during that period. One of those photographers was William Hagewood, who was a photographer for the Berkeley Daily Gazette. Now, the Berkeley Daily Gazette had a well-deserved reputation for having a deeply reactionary line on most things Berkeley. They almost looked like the house organ for then Councilman John DeBonis, who was almost synonymous with the John Birch Society at the time. But young Bill Hagewood was a remarkable photographer whose own personal politics were at odds with the paper's editorial position, although the ferocity and savagery of the state's response during that period was even too much for the paper's editor, Mike Colbert, and they began to editorialize in support, or at least against, the hard-headed ways in which the officials came down on the protesters. But Bill Haywood told me last Saturday, and these are the things you learn after the fact, that the whole experience had so upset him that he resigned from the Berkeley Daily Gazette and left Berkeley after People's Park. And he showed up last Saturday at a book launch that we held at Harold Adler's Art House Gallery and Cultural Center, and told me the story that he was glad he did, because when he left Berkeley, he took all of his photographs as well as the negatives. And that was a good thing, because he later learned that the government had subpoenaed those photographs in order to try to identify the protesters. They never found Haywood, and they never got the photos. As far as I'm concerned, Bill Haywood is a hero of our time. He also told me the really disobliging story of how one of the principal police chiefs, or chieftains, high up in the Berkeley Police Department, Charles Plummer, I believe was his name. He was the boss. And Mr. Plummer died at the age of 87 a few years ago, and was quoted astonishingly at the end of his life as saying his only regret was that they should have come down harder on those folks in Berkeley. It's of a piece with the sentiments by Reagan and Meese and Madigan and the others, sentiments that are on offer in the piece that Bob Scheer, who would have been here tonight were the fact that he is in Hawaii for reasons best known to himself and his wife. I have a hard time trusting a place that has to import its toilet paper, but nonetheless, he thinks that's a good place to go for a little vacation, but sends his regards, and we have included in this book his account of his experience being arrested and brutalized in Santa Rita with so many other people, a piece that was on the cover of Ramparts magazine in August of 1969, an event that was covered very well, called A Night in Santa Rita. And he remembers the quote that Sheriff Madigan gave, that they were going to treat the protesters and the arrestees the way that the U.S. Army was treating the Viet Cong. And
Plummer became the sheriff after Madigan. Plummer retired from Berkeley Police Department, became the Alameda County Sheriff.
He was the assistant police chief of Berkeley at the time. He run the show. He came out of Korea. Thought that's what he was.
Nacio?
How do I make this work? Is it
Just
working?
that way.
Yeah. A note about DeBonis, that John DeBonis, who was this kind of wacko right-wing city council member, whatever the year was that the radical slate finally got elected in Berkeley, 1980, whenever it was, the other council people, there was this great move to try to find some way to invalidate that election. And DeBonis said, hey, they won fair and square. It's theirs now, which was unexpected from that quarter. But he was like, hey, they did it. They did it fair and square.
Let's do it again.
So it would be good, in respect of the way in which, as Faulkner once said, the past is never truly past. What would the panelists say about preserving the park today as the culturally and historically significant public open space for which it was landmark, and for which so much pain and suffering and hope and idealism are baked into that ground? What is your position? Perhaps we could go one by one and have people declare themselves before KPFA's listenership and the audience here today. That would not be uninteresting. Tom Dalzell, what do you think?
I
think that,
You got to use the microphone.
I think that the park is hallowed ground. I think that it represents the ideals of Berkeley beginning in 1958 with Slate, through HUAC, through the free speech movement. I think it can be more beautiful. I think we can get back to the original spirit. But I think that if we lose the park, we lose a big, big part of our soul as a city.
Well, on that line, if you look at sort of our history as workers, when we're defeated, Jesse, in which you will suffer the most out of our defeat if we are defeated, is it takes a long time to recuperate. I mean, we basically, by the process of the thing and what came down, Reagan took power, and in turn in the 80s, he was able to defeat us in our labor movement. We were up to 30, 35%. Now we're 9. I'm sorry. Now we're up to 9, 10%. So the process that took place here, it has been 33 years since we started to win strikes, the last year or this year, through the teachers and a couple of other smaller strikes. So we're now on an upswing. So I think it's my best argument. We don't want to lose the park when we're on an upswing of our class. It's my best argument.